Yeah, so I'm a strange. I'm an economist who's always focused on, the big picture, who's focused on, business cycles, recessions. But about 10 years ago, I got very interested in the topic of longevity. So I focus on the economics of longevity. In particular, I'm passionately interested in how we adapt to the longer lives we now have. In Canada, 100 years ago, life expectancy was 57. Today, under pretty conservative assumptions, it's about 82. And probably about 50% of children born in Canada today can expect to live into their 90s. So I'm interested in how we make the most of that and how we adapt and adjust to this extraordinary new moment in history where the young can now expect to become the very old.
So, what inspired you to this field?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I first got in this question when I was giving a lecture, actually here at London Business School on the world economy. And I give a lecture on what's called an aging society, and you've probably heard of it, Andrew. It's a very common way of phrasing the problem. It just says there's more and more old people. So the number of people aged over 65 in Canada is currently around 1 in 5, and 1 in 20 are over 80. And that number is going to just carry on rising. And for an economist, that's always seen as a bad news story. Old people are seen as a problem. They don't work, they need a pension, they don't pay taxes, they get ill, they cost a lot of money. And there's even this concept called the old age dependency ratio. And it's kind of a misery index. And you know what? I was showing this chart and going through this story of how, all these economies have got a problem, because not just Canada, everywhere's got this problem. And then in it, there was a chart that just showed that on average, we're living for longer and we're healthier for longer. I thought, oh, that sounds like a good news story, not a bad news story. So that got me thinking, and that's how I moved away from an aging society focused on more old people to this phenomena that, however old you are, you've now got more time ahead of you and how to make the most of it. So that's how I got into it. And once I started to think about it, you see it everywhere. You see your children behaving differently from you. I just lost my parents. So you start thinking about life and, how to live it. So that's how I got interested.
How do you enjoy the journey so far?
Fascinating. I mean, another thing, I think what's interesting about longevity is um, there's a famous Greek poet, Pindar, who says the point of life is to become who you are, having discovered what it is. And for me, sort of in my 50s, changing my academic discipline has been very rejuvenating. But also, it feels kind of the right topic for me. It is economics, but also it's about a lot more, and I like its intellectual breadth. But also, it's very personal. If I talk about what's going to happen to the Chinese renminbi or Canadian GDP, it's important, but it's not very personal. But when I start saying about how society adapts to longer life, you think about, and you and me, Angela, one of the most important things for our future is how we age. So yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying it and learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So you have published quite a few well received books, especially the new one. Could you tell me about your books?
If you insist, I'm always happy to talk about that dangerous thing. I'm an academic professor with a new book out. So I have a book called The Longevity Imperative. And it's really about everything I've been talking about. How do we adapt? Because, this aging society story, whenever I hear the word aging society, no one goes, yeah, great, we got an aging society, which is kind of weird, isn't it? Because if you think about it's one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. We have fewer children lost in early years, fewer parents snatched away in midlife, more grandparents meeting their grandchildren. And all we can say is we're an aging society. So, I think it's a longevity society. I, at 59, need to behave differently from my father at 59 and my grandfather at 59 because I had that more time ahead. But the longevity imperative refers to sort of what I call a simple logical story. The first is you are now likely to become. The second is we fear getting old. We worry about outliving our health, our wealth, our finances, our skills, our relationship, our sense of purpose. So that's then the imperative. What are you going to do today to make sure you age well? Because the real secret, Angela, as you know, is that we can change how we age. There's lots of things we can do that improve how we age. And when, the average Canadian 100 years ago had a 6% chance of making it to 90, it's not really an imperative. I'm probably not going to get there. When the majority of Canadians can expect to live into their 90s, wow, you've got to do something about it. So that's the longevity imperative. And I say that we've achieved already the first longevity revolution. Global life expectancy is now over 70, which is a remarkable statistic. The average child born in the world today can expect to become old. So now begins a second longevity revolution. We've got to change how we age. So what do I mean by change how we age? Well, some of it's about our health. We've got to invest much more in our health because we've got these aging related diseases, and those are cardiovascular disease, dementia, diabetes, cancer, all of whom the risk of getting them increases with age. But we can do things to delay getting it. We've also got to change our health system. We've got to have a health system that doesn't intervene when you get ill, but focuses much more upon prevention, on screening and vaccinations, etc. We've also got a problem financially. We hear about a pensions crisis, and governments around the world are sort of saying, well, I'm going to make you older and older till you get your pension. But that solves the government's financial problem. It doesn't solve my problem or your problem or all our problem, which is how do we remain productive for longer? Just because I've got to work for longer doesn't mean I can work for longer. So how do we keep healthy? How do we keep our skills? What jobs can we do in our 50s and 60s? I'm fortunate as a university professor. It's a pretty age-friendly job, but not enough construction worker. So there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen, as well as our finances, because the financial industry would tell you just save more and more if you're living for longer. But that's not really going to deal with it, because you've really got a chance now of living, to 100 and beyond. And just saving isn't going to be enough. We need to think smarter about our finances. And then there's our culture, particularly, my culture, the British culture. We tend to underestimate the capacity of older people, which means that we don't provide opportunities enough for them. We have ageism. And that also reflects our own attitude towards our own future. So the book is about how everything needs to change to make sure we make these long lives not just long, but healthier, productive, and engaged for longer.
Wow, it sounds so interesting. It's a systematic approach to aging society, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's lots of books that tell you, eat kale and fast and sleep well, and all of which is good stuff. But it's about your health. There's stuff about careers, but here I try and cover everything and say, look, for the first time ever in human history, the young can expect to become very old. We've always had old people. Old people are always young, but it's never been the case before that the majority of young can expect to become old. So everyone's got more future, and we have to adapt to make the most of it. And if we don't, if we underestimate the capacity of our later years, if we underinvest in those later years, then we don't have a very good outcome, which is a problem given we're now going to become old.
Wow, yeah, it's brand new approach. It's so broad, right? I think it's really good. It's not only for the government, but also for individuals, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, everything has to change. I mean, in the 20th century, we invented teenagers, we invented retirement, we invented a midlife crisis. And we saw governments, firms, trade unions, individuals all adapt and adjust. It's the same to do today. But I'm glad you think it's different, because all we hear of is this aging society and old people are a burden. But you've got to realize that whatever your age, you're now likely to become old. That's you. And what do you do to seize an opportunity? And of course, it's never been important before. But when we talk about AI and climate change, we sort of say, oh, we've got to adapt, we've got to adjust, or else we have a bad future. When we talk about aging, we don't talk about adapting and adjusting. We tend to just talk about adult diapers and care homes, but we've got to be much more ambitious. There's many more things we can do to ensure that we're healthier and engaged for longer.
Yeah, it's a wonderful conversation with you, Dr. Scott. So what is your vision in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I think, I always describe myself as a patient optimist, because I honestly think we're at a fundamentally different moment in human history. It is quite remarkable. I think for all of human history, life has been short. Sam Beckett, the Irish playwright, says, we give birth astride a grave. The light flickers an instant, then it's gone. I was born in London in 1965. I was an identical twin, and my brother died within the first few days. That was the most common age of death in the UK in 1965. Today it's 87. So I think, it's a big shock to our cultural mindset that now we can expect when we're born to grow to be old. That's what the future is for most of us. Not a minority, but the overwhelming majority. So it's going to take a while. You know, we can't suddenly expect humanity to go, oh, okay, we've got to change everything. But I think for the next 5 years, we'll see more and more of this issue coming into focus, and particularly at a society level in two ways. One would be around pensions and how do we help people work from 50 plus? Because more and more people are dropping out of the labour market, not by choice, but because of they lose their job because of health or ageism. The other thing is you're going to see more and more health systems come under problems because right now we have don't really have a health system. We have a medical system that focuses upon disease. And when a disease is sufficiently acute, it causes you problems. You can't see a doctor. And that's a problem with things like dementia, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease. We've got to switch to prevention. So I think around the world, we're seeing more and more switches to prevention. I think we're already seeing that with consumers being more and more interested in their health and wearables. But that's a really, really big change. So I think for me, the next 5 years will be more and more awareness of this and society slowly saying, oh, my goodness, you know, I thought we're seeing more and more older people. How do we adapt and adjust? And for my own research, it's about getting the research out to convince governments of this, but also to just raise awareness around the world because most people think about their parents or their grandparents in terms of how they're going to age. But if we have to change how we age, if we're going to age differently from the past, you mustn't think about your parents, your grandparents, but you've got to do things differently. As at 59, I have many more years, hopefully, than my father did. So I need to invest in my health more. I've got to think about my career more. I've got to think about my relationships. My father was a good man and did all those things well, but he didn't expect to live as long as we now in society can expect to do so. So it's a lot for us to do as well.
Great. Yeah. So, what is your take-home message for us?
Yeah, so it's very hard. So I think the first thing is you've got to recognize this change, that you have to behave differently from past generations. And whether you're 20, 59, or 79, you have more time ahead of you than past generations. So you've got to think about your future differently. And it's very hard to plan. I don't know what I'm going to want to be doing in 10, 20 years' time. But you've got to sort of try and make a friend of your future self. And as I say, if you can give your future self options and choices, they will thank you for it. And what are the key options you can give your future self? Health, relationships are key. We know time and time again from studies of what makes a good life. Money makes you happier. It doesn't make you happy. It's investing in those good relationships. So health, relationships, and curiosity, I think, are the things you're best set to give your future self. And if you do that, then you've got a good platform for the future.
I agree. Wow. How people find more for your information?
There's my book, The Longevity Imperative, which hopefully answers everyone's questions. And then you can check me out on my website, www.profandrewjscott.com. This is a phenomenal. You're going to read more and more about longevity. You're reading it more in the papers and online. But this is about your future. So do follow up because the more you invest in what's called longevity literacy, the better your future will be.
Yeah, your website is very comprehensive.
Well, I think the other thing to sort of say is you've got to enjoy life. There's lots of stuff about, you know, how you can have these extreme lifestyles that will make sure you live for a very long time. The old joke is always that it doesn't actually make you live a long time, just makes it feel like a long time. So being happy is the best way of aging well. So when focusing on the food, on focusing on the diet and the sleep and the sort of exercise, make sure you also enjoy life too.
Yeah. Make sure we enjoy our life and get educated from someone like you, right?
Well, yeah. I say I think the real thing about a longer life is to find out who you are and what you want to do, and I think that's the inspiring thing about a longer.
Yeah, always have a purpose in life, right?
Yeah, and that's an internal question that everyone can ask themselves, and it can't be answered by anyone else.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for joining us
My
today.
pleasure.